Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Shadow Operator. Harvey Zuniga had spent 23 years in the shadows, operating in places that didn't exist on official maps. His record was immaculate. 17 successful deep-cover operations, 0 compromised assets, and a reputation that made even seasoned intelligence officers whisper his name with respect. At 45, he looked like any other suburban husband. Salt and pepper hair, kind eyes, and calloused hands that Patricia, his wife of 18 years, assumed came from weekend carpentry projects. She had no idea those hands had dismantled terrorist networks across 3 continents. Harvey's official military record showed him as a logistics coordinator, boring, safe, forgettable. The truth was classified at levels that required presidential authorization to access. He was a ghost operator, one of 12 men in the entire U.S. military apparatus who could disappear into any environment and emerge with mission-critical intelligence or eliminated targets. Patricia Compton had met him during his brief stint at Fort Bragg between assignments. She was the base commander's daughter, beautiful, ambitious, and drawn to the quiet intensity she sensed beneath Harvey's unremarkable exterior. Their courtship was swift, their marriage, by all appearances, perfect. Their home in Arlington reflected Patricia's taste for luxury, imported marble, designer furniture, artwork that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Harvey never questioned the expenses. His military salary couldn't support such extravagance, but Patricia's consulting business seemed remarkably lucrative. He assumed she had inherited more from her father than she'd initially revealed. The truth was simpler and more devastating. Patricia had been selling his operational schedules to the highest bidder for 7 years. "You're leaving again," Patricia said that Tuesday morning, not looking up from her tablet as Harvey packed his deployment bag. 2 weeks, Harvey replied, checking his equipment one final time. "Maybe 3. Where?" "You know I can't tell you that." Patricia's jaw tightened imperceptibly. She perfected the art of seeming supportive while harvesting every detail she could. "Of course. Operational security." Harvey kissed her forehead, missing the flash of calculation in her eyes. "I'll call when I can." What Harvey didn't know was that Patricia would be making her own calls to Kelvin Franklin, a rising star general with political ambitions and expensive tastes, and to a Swiss bank account that had grown fat on blood money earned from Harvey's missions. Chapter 2. The Web Unravels. 3 days into what should have been a routine extraction in Eastern Europe, Harvey's world collapsed. The safe house coordinates Patricia had access to, coordinates she claimed to need for emergency contact protocols, had been compromised. Harvey arrived to find his local assets dead, their bodies arranged in a way that sent a clear message. Someone had sold them out. Harvey survived only because 23 years of paranoia had taught him never to trust completely, not even those closest to him. He'd given Patricia false coordinates, keeping the real safe house location known only to him and his handler, Edmund Durham. But the betrayal cut deeper than operational security. Harvey discovered, through careful digital forensics, that Patricia had been accessing his secure communications for years. The sophisticated surveillance equipment hidden in their home wasn't government-issued. It was commercial-grade, expensive, and designed to look like home automation. Edmund Durham, Harvey's handler for the past decade, met him in a nondescript diner outside Quantico upon his return. Edmund was one of the few men Harvey trusted completely, a career intelligence officer whose loyalty to his operatives was legendary. "How bad is it?" Harvey asked, sliding into the booth across from the silver-haired man who'd kept him alive through countless operations. "Worse than we thought," Edmund said quietly. "We've traced compromised intelligence back 7 years. 12 operations, Harvey. 12. We lost good people because someone was feeding our enemies everything they needed to know." Harvey's coffee grew cold in his hands. "Do we know who?" Edmund pushed a tablet across the table. The screen showed financial records, communication logs, and surveillance footage. Harvey's blood turned to ice as he recognized Patricia's face meeting with various foreign operatives in hotel lobbies, coffee shops, dead drops. "Your wife has been very busy," Edmund said, "and she's not working alone." The second set of files revealed Patricia's relationship with General Kelvin Franklin. The affair had started 4 years ago, but their collaboration went deeper than romance. Franklin had been using his position to access classified information far beyond his clearance level, feeding it to Patricia, who then sold it through a network of international brokers. Franklin's political career depends on his military reputation, Edmund continued. He's positioning himself for a Senate run next year. He needed money for campaign funding and influence peddling. Your wife needed a way to access higher-level intelligence than what she could steal from your home communications. Harvey studied the surveillance photos of Patricia and Franklin together. In one image, they were clearly intimate, Franklin's hand on her thigh as she whispered something in his ear. In another, they were exchanging documents in what appeared to be Franklin's Pentagon office. How many people died because of this? Harvey asked. 17 confirmed. Maybe more. Harvey closed the tablet. What's the plan? Officially, we're building a case. FBI counterintelligence is involved now. It'll take months, maybe years to prosecute. And unofficially? Edmund smiled grimly. Unofficially, you're about to become the victim of a very public betrayal. Franklin's people have been building a case against you, Harvey. They're planning to frame you as the mole. Chapter 3. The Accusation. The ceremony was meant to honor Harvey's distinguished service. 23 years of dedication, a chest full of commendations, and a reputation that had earned him the grudging respect of everyone from Navy SEALs to CIA operatives. The event was being held at the Pentagon, with Patricia seated in the front row wearing the Navy dress Harvey had bought her for their anniversary. General Kelvin Franklin stood at the podium, his uniform immaculate, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. At 52, Franklin cut an impressive figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver temples that made him look distinguished rather than old. His political ambitions were barely concealed. Everything he did was calculated to enhance his public image. "Ladies and gentlemen," Franklin began, his voice echoing through the ceremony hall, "we gather today not to celebrate, but to confront a betrayal that strikes at the very heart of our national security." Harvey felt the shift in the room's atmosphere. Military personnel who had been preparing to applaud were now sitting rigid, confused. Patricia's face showed perfect surprise, but Harvey caught the micro-expression of satisfaction that flickered across her features. "For 7 years," Franklin continued, "classified intelligence has been systematically leaked to foreign adversaries. Operations have been compromised. Good men and women have died. And the source of these leaks has been traced to one of our own." Franklin's gaze fixed on Harvey with theatrical precision. "Master Sergeant Harvey Zuniga, you are accused of treason against the United States of America." The room erupted in murmurs and gasps. Harvey remained seated, his expression calm despite the storm of rage building in his chest. He watched as 2 military police officers approached his position. Franklin stepped down from the podium and strode directly to Harvey. With practiced drama, he reached out and began tearing the commendation ribbons from Harvey's dress uniform. "Traitor," Franklin declared, loud enough for every person in the room to hear. The ribbons hit the floor like colorful confetti, each one representing years of service, sacrifice, and blood spilled in defense of his country. Patricia stood behind Franklin, and Harvey saw something that cut deeper than any accusation. She was smirking. Not surprised, not shocked, not devastated by her husband's alleged betrayal. She was satisfied, pleased with the performance unfolding before her. "Nothing to say?" Franklin demanded, his voice carrying both authority and malicious satisfaction. Harvey looked at his wife, saw the truth in her eyes, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. The last vestige of the man who had loved her, trusted her, built a life with her, died in that moment. What remained was the ghost operator, the shadow who had survived impossible odds and eliminated targets that threatened American interests. "Just one call," Harvey said quietly. Franklin laughed. You think your lawyer can save you from this? You think? Just one call? Harvey repeated, his voice carrying a weight that made Franklin step back involuntarily. 20 minutes later, a gray SUV rolled onto the Pentagon's secure parking area. The vehicle moved with purpose, bypassing multiple security checkpoints as if they didn't exist. Harvey remained seated throughout the chaos that followed. The urgent phone calls, the increasingly frantic whispers among Franklin's staff, the growing pallor on his wife's face as she began to understand that something had gone very wrong with their carefully orchestrated plan. The SUV's door opened, and a man stepped out. He was unremarkable in appearance. Medium height, gray suit, the kind of face that disappeared in crowds. But Harvey saw Patricia's smirk vanish entirely as recognition dawned. The man approached Franklin with measured steps. "General Franklin," he said, his voice carrying an authority that transcended military rank. "Remove your Army service uniform. You are no longer serving this country." Patricia's face had gone white. She knew exactly who had stepped out of that SUV, because she had been selling intelligence to his enemies for 7 years. She knew that when the ghost operators came for you, the game was over. Harvey stood slowly, his eyes never leaving his wife's terrified face. "Hello, Patricia," he said softly. "I think we need to talk." Chapter 4. The Reckoning. The man in the gray suit was Oliver Clifford, though that wasn't the name on any official documents. He was Harvey's immediate superior in a chain of command that existed in the shadows between legal and illegal, between acknowledged and denied. Oliver had spent 30 years building networks that could topple governments or save them, depending on what American interests required. "Harvey," Oliver said, extending his hand as if they were meeting at a garden party instead of in the midst of a destroyed military career, "you've been through quite an ordeal." Franklin stood frozen, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and the first stirrings of genuine fear. "Who the hell are you?" "This is a military matter." "Was a military matter," Oliver corrected gently. "Now it's something else entirely." He turned to Patricia, who had backed against the wall, as if trying to disappear into it. "Mrs. Zuniga, or should I say Mrs. Compton? I understand you've been quite busy lately." The use of her maiden name hit Patricia like a physical blow. It meant they knew everything, not just about the affair, not just about the intelligence sales, but about the deeper network she'd been building. The network Oliver's people had been monitoring for months, feeding false information through Harvey's communications to map every connection Patricia had made. "I want a lawyer," Patricia whispered. "Oh, you'll need several," Oliver agreed. "But first, there are some people who'd like to meet you." 2 more SUVs had arrived, their occupants already moving through the Pentagon with the efficiency of people who belonged everywhere and nowhere. Franklin found himself surrounded by individuals whose credentials superseded his authority so completely that his protests died in his throat. Harvey watched the proceedings with detached interest. This wasn't revenge yet. This was just the beginning of justice. The real revenge would come later, when he had time to plan properly, to consider all the lives lost because of Patricia's greed and Franklin's ambition. "Harvey," Oliver said quietly, "you have some decisions to make." Harvey nodded. He understood. The official investigation would proceed, but it would be slow, constrained by legal processes and political considerations. Franklin had powerful allies, and Patricia's family connections ran deep in Washington's political establishment. Justice through official channels might take years and could easily be derailed by political interference. But Harvey had other options. "I'll need access to the files," Harvey said. "Already arranged. Edmund has everything waiting for you." "And operational freedom?" Oliver's smile was thin and dangerous. "Harvey, you've spent 23 years serving your country in the shadows. Your country would like to continue that service, but with more flexibility regarding methods and targets." Harvey looked at Patricia one final time. She was crying now, mascara streaking down her cheeks as the full magnitude of her situation became clear. Federal agents were already reading her rights, but Harvey knew the real consequences wouldn't come from courts or prisons. "There's just one thing," Harvey said to Oliver. "This is personal now. I was hoping you'd say that." Chapter 5. Building the Trap. The safe house in rural Virginia looked like a hunting lodge. Rustic exterior, comfortable interior, and completely invisible to every surveillance system that mattered. Harvey spent 3 days there reviewing 7 years of betrayal, mapping every connection, every transaction, every life lost because of Patricia's treachery. Edmund Durham arrived on the 4th day with additional files and a grim expression. "The official investigation is being stalled," he reported. "Franklin's political connections are proving problematic." How problematic? Senators are making phone calls. The Attorney General is asking questions about jurisdiction. There's talk of national security implications requiring special handling. Harvey wasn't surprised. Franklin's rise through the ranks had been meteoric precisely because he understood how to build political capital. The man had spent years cultivating relationships with the right people, making himself indispensable to their agendas. What about Patricia? House arrest pending trial. Her family posted bail, $10 million, which tells you something about their resources and their concern about what she might say. Harvey studied the financial records spread across the table. Patricia's betrayal had netted her over $12 million across 7 years. Franklin's cut had been smaller, but significant, enough to fund his political ambitions while maintaining the appearance of a career military officer living within his means. "I need to understand their network," Harvey said. "Every contact, every handler, every transaction." "Already mapped," Edmund replied, spreading out a new set of documents. "Patricia wasn't just selling your intelligence, Harvey. She was building her own operation, recruiting assets, developing sources. She fancied herself some kind of master spy. The network was impressive in its scope and terrifying in its implications. Patricia had made contact with intelligence services from 6 different countries, playing them against each other to maximize profits. She'd recruited 3 other military spouses, 2 Pentagon contractors, and a State Department translator. Franklin's contribution went beyond just classified access. He'd been identifying high-value targets for recruitment, using his position to assess which officers had access to the most valuable intelligence. He'd essentially been talent scouting for foreign intelligence services. "There's something else," Edmund said carefully, "about Patricia's family." Harvey looked up from the files. Her father, General Bernard Compton, didn't die of natural causes. The room went silent. Harvey had attended the funeral 2 years ago, consoling Patricia through what he believed was genuine grief for a father she'd claimed to love deeply. "Heart attack was staged," Edmund continued. "Bernard had discovered Patricia's activities. He was planning to turn her in when he died. Very convenient timing and very sophisticated execution. We think Patricia and Franklin eliminated him to protect their operation." Harvey felt something cold and final settle in his chest. Not only had Patricia betrayed him and killed his friends, she'd murdered her own father to protect her profits. "I want them all," Harvey said quietly. "All of them. Every person in their network. Every foreign contact who bought our intelligence. Every handler who facilitated transactions. Everyone who profited from American blood." Edmund smiled grimly. "Now you're thinking like a ghost operator again." Over the next week, Harvey began implementing a strategy that would have impressed his former targets. Instead of a direct assault on Patricia and Franklin, he would systematically dismantle their entire network, turning their own methods against them. The first target was Caesar Rogers, the State Department translator Patricia had recruited. Harvey appeared at Rogers' apartment at 3 a.m., using skills learned in 100 night operations. Rogers woke to find a figure sitting in his bedroom chair, calmly reading through classified documents Rogers had stolen. "Hello, Caesar," Harvey said. "We need to discuss your retirement plans." By morning, Rogers had provided Harvey with detailed information about every document he'd stolen, every contact he'd made, and every payment he'd received. More importantly, he'd agreed to begin feeding false information back through his handlers, creating opportunities for Harvey to identify and target foreign operatives operating on American soil. The second target was Barbara Keith, a military spouse at Fort Hood whose husband had access to deployment schedules. Harvey's approach was more subtle. He arranged for Barbara to discover that her foreign contacts were planning to eliminate her as a security risk. Faced with a choice between helping Harvey or dying, Barbara chose wisely. By the end of the second week, Harvey had systematically compromised every asset in Patricia's network. More importantly, he'd begun feeding targeted disinformation through their channels, creating chaos in foreign intelligence operations while identifying every handler, controller, and beneficiary of Patricia's betrayal. But Harvey was just getting started. The real revenge wouldn't be arrests or prosecutions. It would be something far more personal and infinitely more permanent. Chapter 6: The Web Titans. Patricia's house arrest had become a gilded cage in her family's compound in Georgetown. The Victoria Mansion, worth nearly $20 million, was surrounded by private security, federal surveillance, and lawyers who cost more per hour than most people earned in a month. She should have felt safe. Instead, she woke each morning to fresh evidence that Harvey was systematically destroying everything she'd built. The morning news reported the mysterious disappearance of Andres Hancock, a Swiss banker who had facilitated several of Patricia's largest transactions. His body would never be found, though his bank accounts had been completely emptied, the funds redirected to a foundation that supported families of fallen soldiers. Patricia's phone calls were monitored, but she still received messages. Never direct threats, never anything actionable by law enforcement, just small reminders that Harvey was out there, watching, planning, executing his own form of justice. A photograph of her meeting with a Russian operative in Prague, a meeting she'd thought was completely secret, appeared on her nightstand. A recording of her discussing her father's elimination with Franklin arrived in her email. Most disturbing of all, detailed floor plans of the Georgetown compound appeared in her purse, with her bedroom window circled in red. Franklin was experiencing his own psychological pressure. His political allies were distancing themselves as more details of his activities became public. 3 foreign operatives he'd been working with had been found dead in various countries, each eliminated with a precision that screamed professional execution. "We need to run," Patricia told Franklin during one of their monitored phone conversations. "Get out of the country. Disappear somewhere he can't find us." "He's one man," Franklin replied, but his voice lacked conviction. "We have resources, connections, protection." What Franklin didn't understand was that Harvey wasn't fighting as one man. He was fighting as the tip of a spear backed by the full resources of America's intelligence apparatus. Every favor Harvey had earned, every contact he'd made, every debt owed to him by grateful operatives around the world was being called in. The third week brought escalation. Patricia woke to find that her private security team had been replaced overnight. The new guards were polite, professional, and clearly not working for her family. When her lawyer arrived for their scheduled meeting, he was accompanied by federal marshals and an FBI counterintelligence team. "Mrs. Zuniga," the lead agent said, "we've discovered some irregularities in your bail conditions." The irregularities were significant. Patricia's family had used laundered money from her intelligence sales to post bail, creating a legal quagmire that would take months to resolve. More immediately, new evidence had emerged suggesting Patricia was continuing to coordinate with foreign operatives even under house arrest. "That's impossible," Patricia protested. "I'm monitored constantly. Every communication is recorded." Nevertheless, the agent continued, 3 of your former contacts have been eliminated in the past week, apparently to prevent them from testifying against you. We have reason to believe you're orchestrating these eliminations to protect yourself." It was a masterful frame-up. Harvey had been eliminating Patricia's network, but he'd done it in a way that made it appear she was cleaning house to protect herself. Each elimination was documented in a way that suggested Patricia's involvement, creating a trail of evidence that painted her as far more dangerous than any prosecutor had initially believed. Franklin faced similar pressures. His military colleagues were avoiding him. His political supporters were requesting he withdraw from consideration for various positions, and his staff was being investigated for security violations. Worse, several foreign operatives who could implicate him had begun disappearing or dying under suspicious circumstances. "She's using us," Franklin told his remaining aide, Trevor Yates, a young officer whose loyalty was based more on fear than respect. Patricia is eliminating witnesses to protect herself, and we're going to be blamed for it. Trevor nodded nervously. He'd already begun quietly reaching out to federal prosecutors, hoping to negotiate immunity in exchange for cooperation. What he didn't know was that Harvey had anticipated this move and was already feeding Trevor information designed to further incriminate Franklin while protecting Harvey's real operations. By month's end, Patricia's house arrest had been revoked, and she was transferred to a federal detention center. Franklin had been stripped of his command and was facing court-martial proceedings. Both were isolated, desperate, and beginning to understand that Harvey's revenge was far more sophisticated than they'd imagined. But Harvey was just beginning. The legal proceedings would continue, but the real justice would be administered outside any courtroom, in places where constitutional protections didn't exist and where the only law was the brutal mathematics of consequence and retribution. Chapter 7. The Hunt Begins. Federal detention had not been kind to Patricia. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by orange jumpsuits. The expensive skincare routine had been abandoned, leaving her face gaunt and prematurely aged. But it was the psychological pressure that had truly broken her. Every morning brought new evidence of Harvey's systematic destruction of everyone she'd ever worked with. Russian operatives found dead in Moscow hotel rooms. Chinese intelligence officers discovered floating in the Yangtze River. Swiss bankers who had facilitated her transactions simply vanishing from locked offices. The message was clear. Harvey wasn't just coming for her. He was eliminating everyone who had profited from American blood. Franklin's court-martial had been postponed indefinitely as federal investigators uncovered the scope of his betrayal. His political career was finished, his military reputation destroyed, his personal finances frozen pending asset forfeiture proceedings. He'd been moved to a military detention facility where his former colleagues treated him with the contempt reserved for traitors. But Harvey's most devastating psychological weapon was Hope Daly. Hope was Patricia's younger sister, a woman who had always lived in Patricia's shadow but had maintained a clean reputation as a Georgetown socialite and philanthropist. When Hope requested a meeting with Patricia, federal authorities saw no reason to refuse. Family visits were monitored but permitted. Patricia, Hope said, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair across from her sister, "We need to talk about Father." Patricia's face went white. "Hope, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Hope interrupted. "I understand that you murdered our father to protect your espionage operation. I understand that you betrayed your husband and your country for money. And I understand that Harvey Zuniga has given me a choice." Hope opened her purse and removed a tablet. The screen showed bank records, communication logs, and photographs that documented Patricia's entire operation. But more importantly, it showed Hope's own activities over the past 18 months. "You see, Patricia, Harvey approached me a year and a half ago. He knew what you were doing, but he needed proof. So I became his inside source. Every family dinner, every conversation, every time you bragged about your consulting business, I was recording it all." Patricia stared at her sister in horror. "You've been working with him?" "I've been working with the FBI," Hope corrected. "Harvey just happened to point me in the right direction." "Did you really think Father's death was going to go unnoticed forever? Did you think your own sister wouldn't eventually figure out that you're a traitor and a murderer?" The revelation that Hope had been working against her for over a year destroyed Patricia's last psychological defense. She'd been betrayed by someone she trusted completely, just as she had betrayed Harvey. The symmetry was intentional and devastating. But Harvey's personal revenge was only beginning. Franklin received his own visitor that same week. Van Weber, a career military investigator, arrived with documents that painted a picture of systematic corruption extending far beyond intelligence sales. "General Franklin," Van said, spreading photographs across the metal table, "did you think we wouldn't investigate your other activities?" The photographs showed Franklin in various locations with foreign operatives, but they also showed something else. Franklin had been involved in arms trafficking, using his position to facilitate weapons sales to foreign governments and terrorist organizations. The money had funded his political ambitions, but the weapons had killed American soldiers in overseas operations. "This is fabricated," Franklin protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Is it? Van asked mildly. Because we have banking records, communication intercepts, and testimony from 3 different sources confirming your involvement. We also have this. Van produced a recording device and pressed play. Franklin's own voice filled the room, discussing weapons shipments and payment schedules with a man later identified as a known arms dealer. That's impossible, Franklin whispered. That conversation never happened. But it had happened in a sense. Harvey had used sophisticated audio technology to create the recording using fragments of Franklin's voice captured during monitored phone calls. The technology was perfect enough to fool forensic analysis, and the context was believable enough to convince investigators. Harvey wasn't just destroying their legal defenses. He was creating an entirely new narrative in which Patricia and Franklin were far more dangerous and culpable than their original crime suggested. Chapter 8. The Elimination Protocol. The first elimination was Barbara Keith, the military spouse Harvey had compromised weeks earlier. She was found dead in her Fort Hood apartment, apparently the victim of a home invasion. The security footage had been mysteriously corrupted, and the only witness was a neighbor who reported seeing a delivery truck that couldn't be traced. Barbara's death sent a clear message to every remaining member of Patricia's network. Cooperation with authorities would not guarantee protection. Caesar Rogers lasted 3 more days. His death was more creative, a car accident on a lonely Virginia highway, caused by brake failure that investigation teams would eventually determine was sabotage. Rogers had been driving to a meeting with federal prosecutors when his car went off the road at 90 miles per hour. The message was escalating. Harvey wasn't just eliminating threats. He was demonstrating that distance, protection, and cooperation meant nothing. If you had betrayed American intelligence, if you had profited from American blood, if you had helped destroy lives Harvey had spent decades protecting, then you were a target. Franklin began to understand the scope of what he was facing when Trevor Yates was found dead in his Pentagon office. The young aide had been scheduled to testify about Franklin's activities the following week. Instead, he was discovered by cleaning staff, apparently having suffered a heart attack at his desk. Medical examination revealed exotic toxins in Trevor's system, substances that would cause cardiac arrest in healthy young men, but would be virtually undetectable without specific testing. The kind of substances available only to intelligence operatives with access to weapons that didn't officially exist. He's killing everyone, Franklin told his lawyer during their next meeting. Everyone who could testify, everyone who knows anything about our operations. Harvey Zuniga is executing his own people to prevent them from talking. Franklin's lawyer, an expensive Washington insider named Rudy Gould, looked skeptical. That's a serious accusation, General. Do you have any evidence that your former colleague is responsible for these deaths? Who else could it be? Franklin demanded. Who else has the skills, the access, the motivation? But Franklin's protests fell on deaf ears. From the outside, it appeared that Patricia and Franklin's network was being systematically eliminated by foreign intelligence services seeking to protect themselves from exposure. The deaths looked like standard intelligence cleanup operations, not domestic revenge killings. Harvey's greatest advantage was that his actions appeared logical and consistent with international intelligence operations. Foreign services regularly eliminated compromised assets to prevent testimony, and the sophisticated methods suggested professional intelligence work rather than personal vengeance. Patricia received the news of each elimination in her federal detention cell. With each death, her situation became more desperate. Her network was being destroyed, her potential witnesses were disappearing, and the evidence against her was growing stronger. Worse, she was beginning to understand that Harvey's revenge wasn't limited to legal consequences. He was ensuring that everyone who had betrayed American intelligence would die, and he was saving her for last. The realization that she was living on borrowed time drove Patricia to attempt a desperate gambit. She requested a meeting with federal prosecutors and offered to provide detailed information about foreign intelligence operations in exchange for witness protection. I can give you names, dates, locations, she told the assembled investigators. I can expose operations you don't even know exist. But I need protection. Harvey is killing everyone, and I'm next. The prosecutors were interested but skeptical. Patricia's credibility was limited, and her claims about Harvey seemed increasingly paranoid. When they checked with their intelligence contacts, they were told that Harvey Zuniga was on extended leave and under psychological evaluation following his traumatic discovery of his wife's betrayal. What the prosecutors didn't know was that extended leave meant Harvey was operating with full support of his shadow organization, and psychological evaluation was a cover story that allowed him complete operational freedom. Patricia's offer of cooperation was rejected. She was too compromised to be a reliable witness, too dangerous to be trusted, and too valuable as a prosecutorial target to be offered significant concessions. She was alone, trapped, and waiting for Harvey to come for her. Chapter 9. The Final Judgment. 6 months after the ceremony that had destroyed Harvey's official military career, he stood in a Virginia forest clearing where Patricia Compton Zuniga knelt with her hands bound behind her back. Her federal detention had ended 2 days earlier when a mysterious administrative error had resulted in her temporary release, pending a judicial review that would never come. Patricia had been transported to this clearing by men whose faces she couldn't see and whose voices she didn't recognize. But she knew Harvey was responsible. She'd known since the moment federal marshals had released her that this wasn't freedom. It was Harvey's final act of revenge. "Please," Patricia whispered as Harvey emerged from the treeline. "Please, Harvey, I can explain." "No explanations," Harvey said quietly. "No apologies. No pleas for mercy." Patricia tried to speak, but Harvey's expression silenced her. This wasn't the man she'd married. The quiet husband who'd fixed her coffee every morning and kissed her forehead before leaving for work. This was the ghost operator, the shadow who had eliminated threats to American interests for over 2 decades. 17 people died because of your betrayal, Harvey continued. Good people. Americans who trusted me to keep their operations secure. Their families will never know why they died, but they died because you sold their lives for money. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, Patricia sobbed. You murdered your own father to protect your operation, Harvey interrupted. You're going to tell me you never meant for anyone to get hurt? Patricia's face crumpled. How long have you known? Long enough to document everything. Long enough to map your entire network. Long enough to eliminate every single person who profited from American blood. Harvey gestured to the forest around them. Do you know where we are, Patricia? She shook her head. This is Shenandoah National Park. Specifically, it's about 2 miles from where Lieutenant Matthew Villarreal died during a training exercise 3 years ago. Remember Matthew? 24 years old, married 6 months, wife pregnant with their first child. He died because you sold his unit's operational plans to Russian intelligence. Patricia's eyes widened with recognition and horror. Matthew's body was never recovered from the training accident that killed him, Harvey continued. What his family doesn't know is that it wasn't an accident. It was an assassination carried out by Spetsnaz operatives who knew exactly where and when to find him. You gave them that information. Harvey knelt beside Patricia, his voice soft and conversational. I've spent 6 months eliminating everyone involved in your network. Franklin died in his cell yesterday. Apparent suicide, though the toxin used isn't available to civilians. Your sister Hope is safely relocated under witness protection after providing 17 hours of testimony against you. Every foreign operative who bought your intelligence is dead. Every handler, every facilitator, every money launderer, all eliminated. What do you want? Patricia whispered. I want you to understand that actions have consequences, Harvey replied. I want you to know that betraying your country, betraying your marriage, betraying your family, and murdering your father have earned you this moment. Harvey stood and walked to a nearby tree where a rifle had been concealed. Military precision, scope already zeroed, safety off. You're going to execute me, Patricia said, her voice strangely calm. I'm going to give you the same consideration you gave Matthew Villarreal and 16 other Americans whose lives you sold, Harvey corrected. None. Wait, Patricia said desperately. The money. I can tell you where all the money is hidden. Accounts in Switzerland, the Caymans, numbered accounts worth millions. Already recovered, Harvey said, settling into firing position, redistributed to families of fallen soldiers. Did you think I'd leave that loose end untied? Patricia tried to run, stumbling through the underbrush with her hands still bound. Harvey tracked her movement through his scope with the patience of a man who had made similar shots from much greater distances under far more difficult conditions. The shot was clean, professional, and final. Harvey spent 30 minutes eliminating all evidence of his presence before making a phone call that would bring a cleanup crew to remove Patricia's body. By evening, there would be no trace that Patricia Compton Zuniga had ever been in these woods. 3 weeks later, Harvey received new assignment papers. A new identity, a new mission, a new country where American interests needed protection. The Shadow Organization had rewarded his successful elimination of a major security threat with expanded operational authority and unlimited resources. Patricia was officially listed as missing, having disappeared during her temporary release from federal custody. Franklin's suicide had closed most investigations into their network. The foreign intelligence operations they'd supported had been systematically disrupted. American intelligence was more secure, and Harvey Zuniga had proven once again that betraying the ghost operators carried a price that few could afford to pay. Justice had been served, not in courtrooms or through legal proceedings, but in the shadows where Harvey had always operated best. The man who had spent 23 years protecting American lives had spent 6 months ensuring that those who sold American blood would never do so again. The ghost operator had completed his most personal mission, and now he was ready to disappear again, into the shadows where he belonged, leaving behind only the memory of consequences for those who might consider following Patricia and Franklin's path. Some betrayals could never be forgiven. Some prices could only be paid in blood. And some forms of justice could only be administered by those who had dedicated their lives to protecting the innocent from the guilty. Harvey Zuniga understood this better than most, because he had become the final judgment for those who betrayed the very country they had sworn to protect. The war was over. Harvey had won. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.